Welcome, my fellow wannabes, to my YouTube channel. As you can tell, we're doing things a little bit differently today. I just wanted to say that Geekly Biweekly is proud to announce our new project, Beer Bros. Thank you for joining us. So I'm joined here today by Kyle Jeffries.
What's happening, everybody?
From Mother's Brewing here in Springfield, Missouri. So Kyle, I reached out to you and asked you, I came in here first and I said, hey, I'm starting this thing. I have this podcast, I'm starting a YouTube channel. I want to be able to interview somebody that can kind of tell me what goes on here. Mm-hmm. And it was like in unison. They were all like, Kyle. So you are the brewery liaison?
Brewery liaison, that's the kind of formal term. I'm basically the loudmouth at Mother's Brewing Company. When you need somebody to talk and then talk and then talk and then talk and then you'll clean it all up in post, I'm the person we call. So brewery liaison, I like to talk about beer. I also work behind the bar serving the beer. I do brewery tours. I wear a few hats around here.
So you get a lot of people in here from different areas, and we'll definitely talk about that here in a little bit. How long have you worked here?
I started here in 2012, so basically about a year after the brewery opened, second generation Mother's Brewing Company family.
Okay. So how many people are actually here that started from the very beginning? How many people are left from that original lineup?
We still have 7 of the original, which of course includes Jeff Schrog, who founded Mother's Brewing Company. Our COO, Stuart, he was here from the very beginning. Our Chief Production Officer, David Soper, he started from the beginning. We've got several people here who figured out pretty quickly that this is what they were doing for the rest of their lives.
It's pretty awesome whenever you have an idea and you're like, yeah, we'll see what happens, and then it takes off and you just, like we said before, dreams come true here at Mother's Brewing.
Absolutely, right?
That's awesome. So we're going to get into these questions here, but
okay.
Before we do, we have a few beers over here off camera. Let's start with our first beer because it is a beer show after all. And what are we going to start drinking first?
Well, so I chose 3 beers that we are particularly excited about right now at Mother's Brewing Company. And so we're going to start big and bold with Chug Chug Suckle Suckle. This is a double New England IPA. We have a runaway favorite New England IPA that we call Sunshine Chug Suckle. Hop forward, juicy, hazy, everything you expect out of a New England. And once we decided that we loved that, we decided the only place to go was bigger and bolder. So this is a 10% double New England IPA, Chug Chug, Suckle Suckle, and I absolutely insist we start with this beer.
Okay, fantastic. And I will say that I more recently got into the whole craft beer scene within the past couple years. A friend of mine, actually, he was like, hey, do you like IPAs? And I'm like, no, because unfortunately every IPA that had ever been presented to me was the more piney, bitter, which I have come to appreciate over time. But he's like, no, try this. So to this day, Sunshine Chug Suckle is my favorite IPA that I've ever drank, and I cannot wait to try this. I'm super excited about this beer. So let's go for it here.
Oh, yeah. So your story actually is not uncommon. American craft beer has a long history of hop-forward beers. In particular, that kind of West Coast approach to an India Pale Ale, which is marked by this kind of assertive bitterness and that kind of piney or resiny kind of flavor and aroma. That's in the DNA of American craft beer. Home brewers back on the West Coast were brewing traditional British IPAs. and they had an epiphany. We grow Native American hops here in Washington State and Oregon and Idaho. So they go up and they get these North American varieties of hops. They brew these traditional British IPA styles and basically invent a brand new beer, the American India Pale Ale. And that's why hoppy beers are in craft beer's DNA. I mean, it really starts with this American India Pale Ale in a lot of ways. And that is an acquired taste for a lot of people. Now, what happens with what we call the New England IPA, and anybody out there who already knows this, you can skip ahead, but I would stay tuned. You may learn something. So what we see in recent history is enterprising brewers, innovators in the East Coast, particularly New England, Vermont in particular, started really focusing on the flavor and the aroma of these hops without utilizing the bitterness, which involves where you add them in the brewing process on the cold side versus the hot side. And so we get this brand new style, which everybody calls the New England India Pale Ale, which focuses on hop flavor and aroma, but not so much on its bitterness.
Right.
So definitely
the juicy is what they call
juicy,
it.
right? Absolutely.
And it really does. I mean, this tastes almost identical to Sunshine Chug Suckle in my opinion. Very, very, very fruity, forward, very juicy.
Oh yeah.
It's delicious. It's what Sunshine Chug Suckle deserves.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the biggest part is if nobody told you, you would never guess drinking it that it is 10% ABV.
Yeah, no, that's...
which is why you have to treat this beer with respect. When you start getting into the production side of craft beer, you learn quickly that the most expensive component is hops. By a long shot. In particular, in Chug Chug here, Citra hops are the main kind of like flavor driver. There's a few other newer varieties like Belma, and then there's some classic kind of like Amarillo hops. But Citra in particular, and Citra don't come cheap.
Yep, sounds like it.
It's a favorite hop in the industry right now, and for good reason when you taste this.
Yeah, it's great. So I feel like we've kind of gone over that, but I mean, is there anything you could really add as to what like a typical day of work is like for Kyle Jeffries?
Oh, yeah, it's kind of embarrassing though because I have the easiest job here. You know, when you're talking about your brew house or production, those cats are getting here at 6 a.m. They're strapping on their galoshes, they're getting into their Carhartts, and then they're going to go back there and bust their humps for 8 to 10 hours a day. Typical day for me involves coming in, getting a cup of coffee, checking all the emails that are coming in through the website and answering any questions, maybe working on some kind of label copy or some sort of promotional idea, and then sitting down with somebody like yourself and drinking some beer on camera. So, not a bad gig.
That sounds pretty awesome to me.
But not typical of what most people in the industry are doing on a day-to-day basis, so that's for sure.
Sure, yeah.
But somebody's got to do it.
Yeah. Well, and you're the perfect guy for it. So there we go. So the second question, someone who's closely associated with many different types of people, would you say that the process of craft beer and you know, the whole brewing process is an art form?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. One of the fascinating things that I've learned, because I did not know a lot about the process of brewing or making beer when I started here in 2012. I drank quite a bit of beer. I knew what I liked. I knew what I didn't like. But in terms of how these raw materials, and that of course is water, malted barley, hops, and yeast, get turned into what's sitting in the glass, I've been on a continual journey of learning about that since I've worked here. And one thing that I've found, it is a fascinating blend of art and science. I mean, on one hand, when they're back in the brew house actually creating the wort that's going to go to fermentation, you know, they are taking hydrometer samples and they're measuring the density of the liquid, and in that sense they are being very specifically scientific about this and precise. But on the other hand, they are constantly smelling this liquid, pulling samples, looking at this liquid, sometimes tasting that raw wort before fermentation. and adjustments will be made at some point in the process based on your senses, your experience, your instincts, along with the science. It's a fascinating, complex, and indeed artistic process for sure.
Very nice. And so you obviously work with a lot of different types of people. You see a lot of different types of people in here in the brewery. What is it about not just beer? Because everybody likes beer, and you're a liar if you say you don't like beer.
You just haven't had the right beer.
Exactly. You just haven't found the one that's right for you. Like, my wife really does not like beer, but she likes sours. Mm-hmm. She loves sours. And I'm like, well, that's a beer for you. So there you go.
Yeah.
But what is it about craft beer specifically that draws people together?
I think there's several things going on here. Let's see. One, let's talk about the liquid. Not industrially produced, which American domestics have their place. I don't know any brewer that doesn't occasionally indulge in an ice cold can of any of your major American domestic beers right out of the cooler. But these always have something unique about them, because any brewery you go to is coming from a different place. It's different people there, so all of a sudden now you have all these different variations on this idea of what beer is. So number one, it's more interesting because, well, for example, in our tap room we have 21 taps. That's 21 varieties for somebody to try. So there's already an interest. You don't know exactly what you're going to get like you do when you open American can, right? Two, so much of this comes from local interest. The industry begins with home brewers starting their own small breweries, microbreweries. It's a term that doesn't get used as much anymore, but that's where it begins. And so these people are building these breweries from the ground up, and they're starting. No American craft brewery in the 1990s was thinking about a national distribution model. They were brewing beer for their communities.
That specific area.
Yeah, and
audience.
So it's something that when you live somewhere and you go to your local craft brewery, then that's something you can take pride in. For example, right here, this is Springfield pride, and you can feel that when you walk in and go, that's right, this beer that I love comes from my hometown. That's a very attractive thing. It's a very powerful force. That adds to it, the variety, and then just the sense of adventure. You can go in and try something, and you may hate it. Well, great. Try another one.
Yeah.
See what you think about that. Eventually, you're going to find something that's going to open your eyes. And I think what you said earlier about your wife and sours is a really good example. Sour beers, Gozas, old German sour wheat beer style that got picked up by American craft beer in the last few years, gotten really popular. They play well with all kinds of fruit additions, so they're fun beers to play with. A lot of people who come in here, for example, who I'm serving behind the bar, they start going, I don't like beer. And I said, so one thing I like to hand people is something like a nice Goza sour, because it doesn't drink like beer. To most people, it's
almost like a wine.
Yeah, right. It comes at them in this new way. It surprises their tongue. It surprises their nose. And technically, it's a beer. There's nothing about it that's not beer. It's just not a conception of beer that maybe some people have had. So there's always these new developments and these new innovations that keep this idea of beer and brewing and what this art form is fresh, consistently.
Yeah, and
that's something that's beautiful.
I think a lot of the stigma that beer does get at times, it's like thinking of domestic lagers and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. You're bloaty, farty, out of the can, not pouring it into a glass. That's kind of the stigma for a long time that beer has gotten. I still think still continues to get. Because my wife's family, they're like, oh, you drink beer? It's like, well, yeah, I do.
Right.
I drink it a lot. So being a go-between for the product and the customer, a lot of the times, you probably get a lot of feedback.
Yes.
What's the best compliment that you've ever received and the worst insult that you've ever received?
I'm going to reverse that order so we can end on a high note. The worst insult, I've learned to let that roll off my back. You know, it used to be somebody would be like, I don't know, tastes like Miller, which I didn't think was possibly true. But this idea that maybe we made a beer that didn't distinguish itself from the past 50 years of American brewing. And it was just like, oh, really? You think that tastes like Miller? Then we need to think about something here, because
We want to stand out.
we want our beers to distinguish themselves. But now I realize now that more than a function of the beer itself, a lot of times it's just this idea establishing itself and growing. It happens a lot less now. Even in the last 5 years, the average person walking into this room is so much more informed. All right, so here, I'll get nostalgic. So I turned 21 in the year 1997, and that's when Springfield Brewing Company opened here in town. And I was 21 years old, and I had only drank whatever warm 12-pack out of the trunk of somebody's car that you could convince an older sibling to buy you. And that was my experience of beer. It's a lot of people's experience of beer. And when Springfield Brewing Company opened, I went there, and I drank a pale ale, and it absolutely blew my mind, because I had never had a beer that tasted like that before. And that sense of discovery, as I kept going back to there and trying that is exactly the kind of... So, you know, the worst insult is that the beer just doesn't distinguish itself. People think it's forgettable. People saying things taste terrible isn't an insult to me, because that's just their
It's
individual
subjective.
palate.
Yeah, right.
And so if you don't like big, biting, piney hop, lingering bitterness, that's okay.
Yeah.
Honestly, the best compliment is just anytime somebody orders another one. Like, honestly, you know, I mean, it's nice to hear things like when you say Sunshine Chugsuckle became like the beer that turned you on to IPAs, like changed your thinking about that. That's always beautiful. But really, in the end, it's just sometime when somebody comes up and goes, I have to have another one of those. Like, nothing beats that feeling. It's just like, yeah, I know how you feel, right?
Totally. No, I get that. So we're kind of toward the end of our first beer. You want to open up the second one?
Definitely.
Okay. So, okay, yeah, I was hoping you would do that. So this, I have to tell a story about this beer, because this is Winter Grind, right?
Yes, it is.
So Winter Grind, and this is kind of my own way to explain it, because I'm a wannabe, just so you know.
We all are, honey.
Exactly. Thank you, Kyle.
We all are.
God bless you.
We all want to be something.
That's
don't
right.
we?
So Winter Grind, my parents love this beer. I was not of age at the time, but they'd let me have, everyone's parents
Sure.
let you have sip of some stuff, whenever you're a kid.
Which is
So-
totally legal in the state of Missouri.
It totally
should
is.
be noted.
Totally is. Thank you for bringing that out. It's coffee beer, and not so many words. And someone pitches that to you, and you go. I mean, 3 or 4 years ago, because this has been in production since
This is one of our originals. I think 2012 might have been the first year.
That makes sense. So probably like 2013, I was a senior in high school, and my stepmom comes in and she's like, "Oh my God, coffee beer," and I'm like, "That is the most most disgusting thing I've ever heard in my entire life." So then, of course, when you drink it, you get the best of both worlds. It's a stout, and you get that strong coffee flavor. And do I see coffee grounds in there at times?
You shouldn't.
Okay.
I really hope you don't. Filtration ought to be getting rid of that. And actually, we'll circle back around to exactly how this is made. Yeah, so this is one of our most popular beers. People clamor. They're like, you should make it all year round.
It's a winter beer.
It's not even that so much. It's just an extremely labor-intensive beer. When we gear up to winter grind brewing season, this becomes basically the sole focus of production for
Seriously?
several weeks. Oh yeah.
So it's an intense process.
Yeah, it is. And so one of the things we've got going for us is loving both coffee and beer. David, our chief production officer, like myself, we both come out of the coffee industry before we got into brewing professionally. So, I mean, I've been a barista. He's been a barista. I've roasted coffee before. So this idea of really taking these two great concept set of coffee and beer. So you start with a just basic, clean, dry English stout. And that's the base beer. Now, what we are doing is we're really lucky to have a lot of great coffee roasters here in Springfield. We partnered up with Mudhouse years ago for this beer. So we are going to Mudhouse. We're working with their roaster, Kevin, where they're coming up with a custom blend of beans that is the basis for an espresso kind of blend. He's doing the roasting for us. We're working through this whole process to come up with the coffee we want. They're bringing the beans to us, and then we are grinding them here in-house, and we are actually adding the coffee grounds to finished beer. So this is beer that has fermented. This is a stout that is filtered and is clean and sitting in a tank. And then what we will do is add the coffee grounds, and you will circulate this with a pump through the tank so that it is slowly agitated over a period of time. So essentially, we are making cold brew coffee with beer instead of water. And we did this for several reasons. Non-coffee drinkers out there, they're just like, ooh, coffee's bitter and sharp and acidic. And sometimes it is, particularly when it's brewed hot. One of the reasons a cold steep or cold extraction is really popular with people is because it mutes the natural acidity or sharpness of a coffee and brings up some of the like rounder, fruitier tones that coffee naturally has. So this is why we're choosing this method here. So what we're actually doing is a cold extraction inside the tanks with the finished fermented beer. And it's funny because, like for me personally, but like stone fruit, this kind of like berry-like fruitiness from the coffee really comes out in the aroma.
And it tastes kind of fruity too.
Yeah.
And like it really does. Like, yes, you can taste the coffee, but it is, I mean.
And honestly, that is coming out of working really hard with Mudhouse to give like a finished coffee that on its own naturally wants to give those kind of characteristics, and then infusing that into the beer. So it is an extremely labor-intensive process. But, you know, it's great too. This beer is fun because it's just like subtlety, nuance. These are hallmarks, but not always, because honestly, you put this beer in the glass and it is like coffee in the nose, it's coffee in the flavor, it's coffee in the finish. It maybe isn't the most, you know, nuanced and subtle beer, but it tastes damn fine.
I know for me personally, you know, my love of dessert beers and, you know, like the cookie batter beers, you know, that a lot of these brewers are starting to do, and like the coconutty stouts and stuff that Prairie does and stuff like that. I don't think I would have an appreciation for those beers or, you know, those more exotic type stouts had it not have been for this beer right here.
Yeah, I mean, I think its drinkability is phenomenal. You know, once again, it's amazing how much like the average American beer drinker has changed. You know, 2012 when I worked here, people always used to go, not always, but frequently, I don't like dark beer. I hear that so much less now.
Well, it's everywhere. Like, so many people are capitalizing on the stouts because it's just, they're delicious.
Yeah, and a lot of people are surprised to find out that historically pale ales and lighter golden lagers and things like that are a historically very recent development. Maltsters, who were malting all the barley that are going into these beers, didn't have the technology to produce a pale malt until the like mid 19th century. So if you're looking at most beers prior to the 19th century, they all would have been much darker in color. This idea of pale golden beers, that is a very, very recent development.
Like within
the last 200 years.
Yep.
Absolutely. You know, in a brewing tradition that goes back 10,000 years. You know, so So this idea now that more people's palates are open to these darker beers, these stout styles and everything, there's already a long, beautiful history behind these particular styles. And people now are just open to that, and it's cool.
So working in a brewery, because you guys, this is not considered a microbrewery, right?
Technically it is.
It is considered a microbrewery. Okay.
Yeah, so those definitions are actually set by the Brewers Association, which is, of course, the trade organization that we belong to. And so annual production in a brewery is measured in what we call the barrel. It's 31 U.S. gallons is a barrel. 15,000 barrels annual production and under is technically a microbrewery. And we do fit that. We do, on average, the last couple of years, around 11,000 annual production. Definitely microbrewery. It's not a term that you hear as much in the beginning stages of this industry. 20 years ago or so, microbrewery was definitely a big draw. People advertise, I'm a microbrewery. Today we use it a lot less, but no, it is actually still a very specific definition of the size of a craft brewery, and we are a microbrewery.
So with that considered, would you consider yourself a beer connoisseur?
Yeah, no, I think I am. And the important thing here is to distinguish a beer connoisseur from a beer snob. Beer connoisseur is interested in what they're drinking. They are ready to investigate what they're drinking. They are ready to treat this like a serious thing and then form and often share their opinions about this. But there is not the element of judgment that beer snobs have.
It's pretty easy to tell them apart, honestly, in my opinion.
Oh, yeah, because nobody wants to hang out with beer snobs.
Yeah, no. Yeah, it's like...
Yeah, because...
Nobody wants to be around that guy, and that's what I've had a really hard time with. Like, not hard time, but I've tried to really emphasize on the channel specifically is... Because I review a lot of music on this channel. Mm-hmm. So, for me to come out and say something is bad... No, don't say that. It's, I don't particularly like this thing.
Right.
And then here's why. But you have, because you have like a lot of these other things out there, like, I don't want to name names, but there's certain YouTubers out there that will literally just come out and say, this is bad.
Right.
And that's subjective. I mean, art is subjective, so I wanted to I was hoping you would elaborate on what a connoisseur really is. It's someone who does a lot of something and, like you said, is investigatory and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think a connoisseur cares. They are willing to go deeper. They take their favorite subjects seriously. That's a connoisseur. A connoisseur, particularly in the world of beer, doesn't mean that you're a so-called super taster that can, pick out trace amounts of this or that chemical compound expressing itself through the aroma of a beer. Some connoisseurs can do that, not all of them.
Sure. Well, that's like the more famous ones, that actually like so-and-so will put like a quote on some sort of thing or whatever. But...
And in this industry, like one of the guys who kicked this off was Michael Jackson, not the singer, but the beer professional. Sadly now no longer with us, but he's one of the people who first really started writing about beer in a serious way and inviting people to take this journey. But, that's a connoisseur. Snob, I don't know. That's just another word for jerk.
Yeah.
Honestly,
they're just like, looking for something to hate, and it's...
Anybody who tells you that you're wrong...
Based on your opinion.
Yeah, you can just let that go.
Totally.
Doesn't matter.
So, kind of getting back to that more like artistic type vibe, how do beers end up making it into the Mother's lineup? I mean, what's the whole process behind that?
Yeah, once again, this is a really interesting idea. One of the beautiful things about this industry is, we have 23 total employees at Mother's Brewing Company, and it doesn't matter if you work in the office or if you're in packaging or working behind the bar. It's always an open conversation about the beers we're making here. Obviously, the brew house, they are the professionals, so they're driving most of the development of new recipes. But anybody here who has an idea, they are welcome to find a brewer and start talking to them about that. Favorite beer of mine, I love white IPAs. I love Belgian wit styles that are hopped like American pale ales. Brilliant style. I love it, love it, love it, love it. We don't currently have one, but I'm constantly like grabbing a brewer and I'm being like, all right, when you have an open kind of development, just think about a white IPA, please. So, as a production, once again, we might have 10 different beers out on shelves in the world, in your liquor store, convenience store, package store, grocery store, or at your favorite bar or restaurant, but we have 21 handles here. Right. And this is a beautiful thing. This is where you're watching our brew house stretch their legs a little bit, play, experiment. So it starts with everybody just talking about beers. Maybe somebody comes back from a trip out of town and was like, I was at so-and-so brewery and I had this beer. Or maybe they bring a bottle back or a can back. And then we all try it and we're just like, yeah, that's intriguing. So, it is constantly a process of everybody here who shares the same love for beer, having that conversation and somebody getting intrigued and being like, yes. Yeah, what about like right now we have a raspberry goza on draft in here. And that's one of my favorite beers we've ever made. And I couldn't tell you, honestly, one person who's responsible for that beer.
It's like a family.
It is like a family. Now, having said that, brewers, being connoisseurs and professionals, have a lot of opinions, but they sort of cycle through the brew house. It's just like, all right, we've got an open spot coming up. Jared, you're up. What's the project you've been wanting to experiment with for a while? So they get to cycle through. So every recipe begins at least with one individual brewer's conception. And then beautiful thing about this industry is if you're sitting at your local brewery and you're drinking in their tap room, you are collaborating with that brewery on their future. Because based on one-on-one interactions with beer lovers, we get to decide, people really like this beer. Maybe it should go into full production, which is exactly how Sunshine Chugsuckle started. It was one of our brewers, Brent. It was his baby. He wanted to do this Citra-based New England IPA, so he did a small batch of it. We served it in here, and it just took off. So after that, we started to look at it, and we were like, all right, well, is this a viable option for full production? And then it was. And then it took off out in the world. And then that leads to something like Chug Chug Suckle Suckle, which we just had, which is like, people are responding to this, so let's
do something with it.
Yeah. And so it's this, once again, really like layered interaction of everybody who works here, all coming together, sharing a passion, and then making those kinds of decisions based on, once again, what our customers here in the tap room are telling us.
Right. Makes sense. No, I think that's an awesome process, and I was kind of hoping that it was something like that. I'm not sure it's every brewer's process, or I'm not sure if it's, because obviously there's probably a sort of moxie that that certain breweries can get at times given their success and stuff like that.
Sure.
We're talking about beer snobs, I think there's, a certain level of cockiness that comes with whatever level of success you're in. Just being realistic, because at the end of the day, it does boil down to dollars and cents. Mm-hmm. And love only goes around so much. But it's nice to see that a very successful microbrewery like Mother's has a very organic, sort of family-type way of getting delicious beer into my mouth.
Yeah, and it's true. And then, once again, you bring up an important point. This is a business. It does have to make money to continue to give us all these great jobs and everything. So, it's not like we're not paying attention to the market and the trends and what things are happening. Sometimes you have to make hard decisions based on the economics. We had, years ago, a brown ale. It was called Holy Mole. It was like inspired by a mole sauce. It had cocoa nibs and 4 different kinds of smoked peppers in it. And it had hardcore fans, but it was a complicated and expensive beer to make because of all the adjuncts that got added to it. And it didn't pan out, and we stopped making that beer.
Right.
We didn't want to stop making it. We
It's
all
just what
liked it.
happened. Yeah.
But it wasn't feasible anymore. Or Towhead, one of our original beers. It was an American blonde. It was kind of inspired by a German Kolsch style ale. Started making that in 2011. In 2019, we stopped making it. And it was kind of it was a weird thing for this brewery to stop making one of our beers.
Right.
Towhead. But the fact of the matter is you looked at the market and beer drinkers at large in the world were like, Kolsch-inspired golden ale?
No.
Nah,
Yeah.
I'm not interested. You have to respond to that.
You gotta make it. You gotta make them love the next thing just as much.
Absolutely.
So, as you can see, I have an empty freaking glass here, and I think it's time for our third beer.
That's right. And so, of course, like I said, chose today's beers on some things we're very excited about. And let's do a big reveal here.
Oh,
Dun,
freaking
dun, dun,
A.
dun. That's right. This is the barrel-aged s'more. Power to you. You mentioned earlier pastry stouts. Big trend in the industry right now, which is big, rich, imperial stouts inspired by desserts. So obviously s'more power to you based on the s'more. So this has tons of cocoa nibs added, and we're lucky here in Springfield that Askinosie Chocolate is located here, which is one of the world's premier chocolatiers. So we're able to get cocoa nibs from them, a little bit of cinnamon in here, a little bit of marshmallow goo. It's sweet, it's sticky. That beer actually came out about a month ago. However, this is the very special barrel-aged edition where the base stouts spent almost a year in Willet bourbon barrels, Old Forester 1910 bourbon barrels, and Fitzgerald bourbon barrels. So here we go. You will be, outside of this brewery, one of the first people. This actually is going to be released in our tap room on Saturday the 26th for anybody who's interested. But you will be one of the first people outside of this brewery to try this.
Well, I feel super honored because I specifically asked if we could drink this beer on the show. And if I get this out whenever I hope to, which is like tomorrow, then people will know that I was one of the first ones that got to try it. But I mean, they'll take your word for it, I'm sure.
That's true.
So thank you so much for letting us open one of these. I'm super duper excited.
Yeah.
I'm heartbroken that I cannot be here for the release, and because I was going to buy as many bottles as I possibly could.
You'll be here in spirit.
Okay, fantastic. Here we go. Oh my God.
Yeah, right. Typically, your big imperial pastry stouts. A lot of times they're really sweet. That's great for some people. They make great dessert beers. What I like about this one is how the spirit character of the barrels just tamps down that sweetness a little bit. Plays really nicely with it.
That is a heavy hitter right there.
Yeah, huge chocolate in the nose, but I'm also picking up that spirit character from the barrels as well. Yeah, this is tasty. This is really tasty.
This is one of the better barrel-aged stouts I've had. I mean, I think you can put this, especially if you let one age. I mean, because this will get better with age, right?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the great things about big imperial stouts, barrel-aged beers, is you can actually sell them. For most beers, that's not the case. Mm-hmm. IPAs, no, you want to drink that as soon as you possibly can. Big barrel-aged stout, yeah, buy more than one.
Yeah,
Put one in a cool, dark spot. Come back to it a year later. See how it's changed.
This one really reminds me of something that you could stack up right there with like Bourbon County, or more of the like barrel-aged bomb, stuff like that. That really reminds me of those specific characteristics, the very sweet kind of chocolatey.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Very, very, very good. Really good. So a lot of people take the pairings of beer with food super seriously.
Yeah.
Do you think that there's a universal food that goes good with any beer?
Oh, man. That's a tough one. Let me think about that for 5.5 seconds.
For me personally, whenever I thought about this question, I think you can drink pizza with any beer, and will both make the pizza just as delicious, but also make your beer taste just as good, if not better.
I mean, I think pizza is a good choice. Chicken, honestly, any kind of chicken, like baked, roasted chickens, I think go well with a variety of styles. Like we have, take our brown ale, Three Blind Mice, for example. Technically, I guess you might call it a darker beer, but you could put Three Blind Mice next to a nice like salad with roasted chicken in it. But you could also eat it with a steak or drink it with a steak. No, pairing is an interesting thing where there's like rules of thumb. You know, most people are familiar with it in the wine world. They're just like, oh yes, if it's like
Right.
red meat or big tomato-based sauce, you're going with a red wine. If it's fish or chicken, you're going with a white wine.
Right.
But also everybody knows that those rules are made to be broken, and it
Yeah.
works that way with beer. You know, let's take this barrel-aged s'more right here. You could pair this with any number of desserts. Here's the deal. I probably would not drink this with a, you know, steamed whitefish. But again, you know, that sense of like pairing and what works well and that's another part of the adventure and
Subjective.
the journey. Yeah. And so it's great because you can go home and with a pizza from the chain or make your own pizza and then sit down with a couple of different beers and find out which one works. And that's just more of the fun of this whole thing.
There you have it, folks, from the horse's mouth. So,
Sorry.
so what is your favorite mother's beer?
Sunshine Chugsuckle.
High five.
Just always drinkable, so flavorful, so aromatic. It's got the kind of creamy mouthfeel that you expect out of a New England IPA, but I don't find it overly filling. I find it just completely approachable, exciting every time I drink it. Sunshine Chugsuckle. That's
Well,
my
because, I
favorite.
mean, you guys have used different hop variants for that beer as well, right?
Yeah, well, one of the great things about New England IPAs is they are great vehicles for being able to experiment. You know, we've come back around to some of our favorites. Again, I mentioned the Citra variety. That's always going to be a component of this beer moving forward in the future. But yeah, it is a great place where we had this really great batch of a variety called Mosaic. And we did a Sunshine Chugsuckle that was 100% Mosaic hops. And some people are like, well, if it has different hops, how can it be the same beer? And that's a really great question. The grain bill always starts out the same, so the base wort that's heading to fermentation and all the dry hopping is going to be the base. That's going to stay consistent, but then you get to explore these hops and tease out some of these like finer characters. You know, whether or not you're adding these hops in the whirlpool after we boil, and the boil is traditionally where you're adding hops for bitterness, but you can skip that step. You can add in the whirlpool, and then after the wort's cooled down, dry hopping happens in the cellar. So it's a cold hop extraction process. But every one of these different hops out there is going to contribute something a little different. So again, that's that art and science that we're talking about. Where
Right. And it's some people, because I mean, I've had every time Chugsuckle has dropped, I would always look for the specific hop. And I think the Mosaic hop, like what you were talking about, might be my favorite one.
Really?
I think it might be.
Okay.
I do
well,
like it. I mean, I really, really like it. I mean, obviously, I like it all, but I
Sure.
think that particular, because I had one, we were just drinking, or I'm sorry, I had like a case and we were just drinking them like crazy. I had them when my buddy came down, but then the next one, it tasted different the next time. And for whatever reason, I was like, oh my God, this is the one. If I can find this right now as much as possible, this is one I want to drink more. So, but I mean, then again, like you said, or like I said earlier, the beer's getting to me. Like I said earlier, the I'm pretty new to the craft beer scene, really trying things out, and I could be missing something. So there's that too. But
I doubt you're missing anything. It's probably just, once again, this is a variation on a theme that really resonates with you.
right.
Sunshine Chucksuckle is always going to be variations on a single theme, which is the idea of just like super juicy, fruity, hop forward flavor. But there will be variations in that. And once again,
Subjective.
that's
Part of it.
That's why once you've tried it once, you're not done with it.
It's true.
Because
I do have to say this, more power to you. The barrel aged is considerably different from the regular, because I bought 2 bottles like the day after the original came out, and I mean this is really, really, really good. I mean, I will probably, if you guys don't sell out, I will probably buy one to drink with some friends and one to just save for however long, just so really good. Thank you for pouring that again.
yeah, sure.
So, Mother's is a very local icon within the Springfieldians here in Missouri. Was it really always meant to stay local, or is there a goal to really branch out and be bigger than life?
No. Bigger for certain values of the word bigger. Jeff's original conception was always a regional brewery, but never a national brewery. Local for us vaguely means a day's drive from the source. So, right now we cover about 3/4 of the state of Missouri. Just, we don't do the northern part of Missouri yet. About 1/3 of the northeast part of Kansas, a handful of St. Louis metro area counties in Illinois, and then everywhere in Arkansas. That's not dry. 50% of Arkansas is still dry counties. But, the longest long-term vision you could imagine would be that Mother's would be available in Missouri and every state that touches Missouri.
4-state area, whatever.
Well, I mean, honestly, include Nebraska and Iowa and in that.
Again, the beer.
But that's the long-term vision. Slow and steady. That's the name of the game. But, and I field inquiries from people through our website, emails, where people are like, when am I going to be able to pick you up in Oregon? And it's just like, I'm sorry. That's just not.
Never.
That's not what we do. We're
Come
a
visit us,
regional
bro.
brewery, right? Also, Oregon, I'm just like, you've got 5 breweries on every square block.
Yeah.
But thank you.
Right.
But no, we are regional, and we're a Midwestern brewery in our core.
Sure.
Jeff, the founder, is a Kansas boy. Grew up in rural Kansas, moved to Springfield, I think in like 90 or 91, and has been here ever since. The Midwest is who we are. And so
Stick with what you know.
that's what we're going to do. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. Stick with what you know. So, I've seen, which I thought this was hilarious, because Brad Pitt is from the Springfield area, and you guys shot a commercial with Doug Pitt reenacting the 7 sequence.
Yes.
What's in the freaking box, right? Which was, from somebody who's a very amateur filmmaker, and very, but can appreciate it. I mean, shot for shot. It was insane how good the lighting effects, I mean, the color grade, everything. It looked really, really good. How did you guys pull that off? And I mean, is he a friend of the brewery? I mean, does he still live here? I mean, tell me how that would happen.
All right.
How that happened.
So, the long story short, so this was a promotional video for a beer called Doing Good. It is an orange wheat ale. So this all begins a couple of years ago. Care to Learn, that's the charitable organization that Doug Pitt founded. and it provides health and hygiene supplies for underprivileged children so that they can go to school with like confidence and not have to be worrying about where their breakfast is coming from. And so Doug Pitt, beer fan, his staff wanted to give him a special present for his birthday, so they contacted us about having him come in and maybe collaborating and helping brew a beer here. And because Doug Pitt is a natural philanthropist who always wants to do the most possible good for his actions, this quickly evolved into, what if we made a beer in collaboration with you, and then some of the proceeds of that beer went to Care to Learn. CareToLearn.org. Check it out. So we decided we were going to do this, and then we needed a promotion for it. And we just came up with a really great idea that it would get some traffic and might flirt with virality if we did a spoof of Seven and Doug Pitt portrayed Brad Pitt's character. And fortunately, he thought that was a hysterical idea and absolutely agreed to do with it. He's got a great sense of humor. He's not above like poking fun at his famous relation. Now, the video itself is impeccable, and that is thanks to our friends at Lock and Stash, which is a local video production, and they are amazingly talented. They actually donated their services for that video because it was for a charitable effort. And they were the masterminds behind
making that happen.
They actually, if you search it out, they have a side-by-side, frame-for-frame comparison of the original movie versus the video they shot for us, and then you can see exactly how good they are.
I've seen that video. Is that so? That's from them then, huh?
That is from Lock and Stash, and
gotcha.
They are amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. I mean, because I've watched the video probably like 5 or 6 times over the course of the past year or 6 months, 7 months, something like that.
Yeah, I think it came out in May.
Yeah, so for the past however long, I've revisited that video multiple times because of how uncanny it really is. It's very good, so props. So aside from Doug Pitt then, I mean, who's relatively famous, I
sure.
mean, whatever. Has there ever been, and this is the last question, has there ever really been anyone in here that is worth mentioning that's like, oh yeah, I remember when so-and-so came in here, or someone relatively famous or anything like that, or someone like that really meant something to you whenever they came in here, just anything like that?
Not personally that I've ever experienced, but the ghost of Lincoln is supposed to haunt our cellar, and I don't know why when he has the entire White House, but apparently every once in a while. That's just a spooky Halloween reference since it's that time of year. No, you know what? How about this? You know what? Everybody who steps through that door is a VIP and a celebrity. Anybody coming in our tasting room is already the most famous person on the face of the earth to the staff at Mother's Brewing Company.
When you freaking have the wannabe critic in your cellar, I mean, you're not your cellar, your brewery, that's a pretty big deal.
No, it is a big deal, actually. Certainly of anybody I've sat down at a table with, you probably have more views on YouTube than anybody else. So you're our favorite YouTuber.
Boom. Kick butt, you guys. Look at that.
Suck it, PewDiePie.
Well, Kyle, I appreciate you sitting down with a aspiring YouTuber, taking the time out of your very busy schedule to drink a couple beers and just talk about what you do here, and to give me some stuff for our new show that's coming out. It's going to be coming out hopefully mid-November. Going to have several episodes shot, and the idea is going to be that if we can get some cool interviews like this, we'll post them. But aside from that, it's going to be me just drinking beer with my buddies. We'll talk about beers we really like. Me and my wife already recorded the first 2 episodes of the show. It's ready to post. We were decided to review Natural Light and Natter Days from Natural Light, because that's one she likes, which surprisingly has a lot of depth to it, in my opinion. So be on the lookout for that. check out that website, caretollearn.org.
Yeah, caretollearn.org.
Yeah, I don't know anything about this. This is news to me as
It's
well.
it's
so
a
please check
great
it out.
Missouri charity that deserves your attention. They do good work.
Fantastic. Well, Kyle, thank you very much, my friend.
Yeah,
I really appreciate
cheers.
it. Boom. Dude, that was awesome.